talk about another kind of world. Another kind of world.
What are you afraid of?
I'm lost in old ways.
I'm not afraid.
Well, here goes nothing. Talk about another kind of world. Another kind of world.
What are you afraid of?
I'm lost in old ways.
I'm not afraid.
Just listen.
Hello there. Welcome to the first installment of No Experience Required. This is a coding stream aimed at people who perhaps are a little less technically confident or want a refresher on the fundamentals of writing JavaScript. In every episode, we are going to be building a project together, but we're also going to cover the language fundamentals and make sure that you have really solid grounding in what we're doing. So it's probably useful to introduce myself. My name's Kevin. I'm a developer advocate for Vonage, formerly Nexmo, and that means that I get to support developers learning and using our tools. And apparently I have a co-host this evening, my doggo Moobeen. Hopefully we won't hear from him much. So the way these are going to work is that we're going to start with a little 10-15 minute primer on JavaScript features away from the project. And then once we've done that, we'll talk about the actual project at hand and go step by step. I'm going to give you loads of time to work on it, and there'll be a few checkpoints where I take pause and show you the code, and we can have a little bit of a chat. If you need to, at that point, spend some time just comparing what I have in my code editor to what you have in yours, you can take that time to just make sure you're up to date. So today we're going to build a Facebook bot using the Vonage Messages API. It's not going to be a clever bot, but what it will do is store messages that it is sent in a database. And then when a user sends the keyword recap, it will go and send back to them everything that we've stored against their user to date. And that's all it's going to do. It's not going to do anything more clever, but it should give you a really good grounding in how the APIs work. And then you can go away and make it clever. So a little bit about what you're going to need, because I want to give you some time to grab that. If you haven't already, go and install node.js at nodejs.org. There are nice installers for macOS, there are nice installers for Windows, and I think there's a nice installer for Linux distros as well. What is Node.js? So we're going to be writing everything today in a language called JavaScript. JavaScript traditionally is the language that comes with web pages. In fact, on this web page right now, there is quite likely some JavaScript running. And what Node.js does is let us run JavaScript in contexts that are not the browser. So that could be on a server. I've seen Node.js running on some hardware projects as well. And this is what we're going to use in order to listen for incoming messages, do what we need to do with them, store them in a database, or go fetch records, and then return them to the user. But before we continue, I want to just spend some time going through the language fundamentals. It'll take about 10 minutes. If you feel like you've got this in hand, by all means stick around, help people in the chat, but equally feel free to go grab some fresh air or make a cup of tea and come back in about 10 minutes. So if you haven't already, this is also your chance to go and grab Node.js, run through the installer and make sure you have it. You're also going to need a code editor. Strictly speaking, you don't need a code editor. Most operating systems come with some form of text editor, whether that's, I think it's called Notepad in Windows or TextEdit in macOS, but you're going to have a much better time if you grab a code editor. I use Visual Studio Code, which is free and open source, and that's probably the one I would encourage you to go grab as well. So I'm going to go over to my code editor here. I've created a folder on the desktop just called Facebook Bot, and I've opened that here in Visual Studio Code. You can go ahead and do that, create a folder, go up to the file and open folder and open this folder here. I think you might also be able to grab the folder itself and just drag it onto Visual Studio Code and drop it, and it should open everything for you. And I'm just going to create a new file in here. I'm just going to call this, it doesn't really matter what you call it, I'm going to call mine primer.js. Primer.js. .js denotes that this is a JavaScript file. And this is not going to be part of our application, but I'm going to use this to kind of show you how JavaScript works, and then we'll actually build our application in a separate file. So, like most programming languages, the concepts in JavaScript are shared across most languages. So we write code here in this file, we save it, and then we have to find a way to run this code. Now to do that, we're going to need a terminal. In Windows, you can use PowerShell. You can also use, what's it called, the command line. It's called terminal in macOS. One lovely thing about Visual Studio Code, though, is that it has a built-in terminal. So the default keyboard shortcut on macOS is Control and then the backtick, and it opens it up like this. But you can also just go up to the top, and it is in, there's like a little terminal option, and you can do that and you can pull up a new terminal from there. So this is the terminal, and this is where we'll actually go run our code. Once you have Node.js installed, the way we'll run that is just by typing node space and then the name of the file we're running, primer.js. That successfully ran our amazing file that has exactly nothing in it, and then it ends because this doesn't have anything in it. So let's get started in here by typing by talking a little bit around types. So data in JavaScript can be one of a number of types. The types broadly exist in other programming languages, though in some programming languages that they look slightly different. I'll detail that when we get to it, just so you're aware. I'm going to show you 4 main types in JavaScript, and we'll be seeing these types throughout the kind of workshop portion of this stream. So I want to make sure we really understand what they do and how they look, so when we get to it, we know what we're looking at. So in order to create a value in JavaScript that we can reference, we have to create what is known as a variable. Now in JavaScript, there are 2 main types of variables. The first uses a keyword called let. So you write the word let and then a space, then you give this variable a name. So I'm going to call this one, I don't know, name, like so. Then we do an equals sign, and then on the right hand side of the equals goes the value. What's important or what's worth noting is in some cases in JavaScript, spaces really matter, and in others they don't. For example, this space matters because it splits up the declaration let from the variable name, but this space here doesn't matter. Now I'm going to use consistent spaces, but just know if you're looking at other people's code that sometimes it matters and sometimes it doesn't, and we'll see that more throughout this workshop as well. So what are we actually going to store in this name variable? Well, we're going to store my name, and this is and so we're going to do so like this. Notice the quotes on either side of the word. This means that this value is a string, a text value. It doesn't matter if you use single quotes or double quotes, but they have to be the same both sides, so watch out for that. In later versions of JavaScript, which you probably will be running, you can also use this backtick character, but just remember that you need to use the same type of quote on both sides. So this is a variable. Fantastic, we've now stored this. Now it's time to go ahead and use it. And in order to, there are multiple ways to use variables, as I'm sure you can imagine. But one thing we want to do is we just want to take the value and we want it to be displayed down here in our console or terminal or whatever it's called. JavaScript calls it a console though. And the way that we get values down there is we write console.log and then 2 brackets like so. And then inside of these brackets is the value that we want to display. So just to be clear, I could just put a string straight in here. Let's run this. Let's save this and then let's run this. And you can see that value just got printed straight away. Oh, it might be worth noting, I'm in my terminal here and I can tap the up button on my keyboard in order to pre-fill the last request, and we'll be using that a lot just to save ourselves some time. But just like we put the string in here, we can also put the name of a variable, not in quotes. So we can put name in here. And then we can run node again, and there we are. It's now printing my name like so. There's another type of variable though. It's known as const. It means constant. It means that this variable will always have this value associated with it. This will make sense in a little bit, but just know that there are 2 types of variable, let and const. And general good practice is if this is not going to change, my name isn't going to change, or it isn't going to change in the context of this application, then we're going to use const. And really we should only be using let when variables can change. And this can save you loads of headache in the future. So that is a string, a text value. Next, we're going to talk about numbers. So I'm going to create a variable and I'm going to call this age. I'm going to leave you all guessing and pick a random number. And the value here is going to be, we'll go 21. There we are. So here we have a variable with the value of 21. Now that's a number. Notice, because it's a number, there's no strings around it. If I didn't put strings around this value here, it would be an error because this is clearly not a number. And also it's worth mentioning that this value is different to this value. This is a string. These are just characters that are together in a text block. But this is a number. Now, just to explain, in some programming languages, numbers that have decimal points and values that don't have decimal points are treated differently. In JavaScript, in most cases, they're treated the same. They're just called a number. So this is a number. So now let's put age in here, save that, and rerun our value. And we can see that 21 has printed here. My terminal does something nice in that when it is a number value, it has a different color, just so I can tell them apart if ever that is a problem. Now that we have this number, we can start doing some interesting things with it. We can do basic arithmetic. For example, we could do age times 2. So this is how we do multiplication. This is how we do addition, subtraction, and division. That's a forward slash, specifically a forward slash. So we're just going to take that back to times 2, and we're going to run it again. And there we go, and there's the value. But now it's my birthday. It's not my birthday, but let's say it's my birthday and we want this value, age, to change. We want this value to now be 22. So what do we do now? Because it's not feasible necessarily to always be going and changing this value. Maybe we want to change it later on in our application. So when we're reassigning values, we can pretty much take this part of a variable declaration without the initializer, without const or let, and we can repeat it. So now age is equal to 22. Now what's going to happen? We're going to run it, and there's an error. Why is there an error? In fact, this is really helpful in that it tells us exactly what the error is. It says assignment to constant variable. Remember when I said there are two ways to define variables in JavaScript, broadly speaking, and constants should only be used when variables will not change. This is what happens when you try and go against that. It just straight up errors. Const cannot be redefined. So if we now change this to a let, and we run that again, now everything is fine. And just to be clear, this has happened. So if we use age in other places, age is 22. There are lots of things we can do here. There's nice syntax for increasing a value by 1, which is this, or decreasing it by 1. There's loads of other little things we can do. That we can also say age is now the value of whatever age currently is plus 1. And that way we don't need to care what age currently is. We'll just add 1 to it straight away. We're not going to go too much in depth with this, but know that we can do this with JavaScript operators. Next, we're going to talk about lists. And in JavaScript, lists are known as arrays. That's a broad simplification. Lists exist as well. But if you think of a list of items, let's say a shopping list, every item on that will exist within an array. This is how we do it in JavaScript. I'm going to delete this for now. So we create a new variable, and let's call this, as I said, shopping list. You'll notice I did this as a capital letter. I don't have to do that. It could all be lowercase. We could separate it with a dash or an underscore. The convention in JavaScript generally is that the first letter of the first word is lowercase and every subsequent word is uppercase, but that's just convention. I would encourage you to do it, but you don't have to. And in order to create an array in JavaScript, we're going to use square brackets like so. And items in here are comma separated. So for example, let's create a string. We'll call this apples, comma. The next item is going to be, I don't know, oranges. And the final item is going to be a banana. I always get hung up on that word for some reason. I don't know why I chose that. And so this is an array with 3 items in it. Now, if I was to console log the shopping list, like so, and run that, as we can see, the whole array has been printed to the console. We can also grab single items after Kevin, put your teeth in and say real words. After we use the name of the array, we can use square brackets, and then we can put what position the item is in. So I'm going to put 1 in here, save, and I'm going to run it again. And what's this going to pull out? So you might have thought it was going to pull out apples because that is the first item, but in fact it pulled out oranges. Now the reason for this is arrays in most programming languages, but certainly in JavaScript, are what is known as zero index. That means the first item actually is at 0. There we are, there's apples. This is 1 and this is 2. So this is kind of your primer on arrays. The other thing we can do with arrays is we can run code for every single item in that array. And this is how we do it. We do it using what is known as a for loop. Now in JavaScript, there are three main ways of writing for loops. I'm going to show you my favorite way of writing for loops, but just know that there are a couple of others. So we write the word for and then some brackets. And in here, I'll write it, then I'll explain it. So I'm going to write let fruit, because my whole shopping list was just fruit, because apparently you can sustain yourself just on fruit, of, and then shopping list. 2 squiggly brackets like so. And now code in here will run for every item. So it will run with apples, it will run with oranges, and it will run with banana. And the way this works is, essentially we are defining a variable called fruit, and the value of that will change with every iteration of the loop. I think this is easier by just writing console log, typing in the word fruit, and showing you what happens here. So we can see that it wrote apples, it wrote oranges, and it wrote banana. All of those values were assigned to fruit at the point in time that this line was run. So the first time it had apples, the second time it had oranges, and the third time it had bananas in it. So this is known as a for loop. There are several other ways of writing for loops in JavaScript. This is the one that I'm not sure if we do need to use it in this workshop, but this is the one that I will almost always default to unless there's a specific reason. And if that happens in future, then we'll just talk through it. So that's an array. And then finally, for the basic data types that I want to cover for the sake of this workshop and this primer, is we're going to talk about objects. So I want to think about my dog Moo, who co-hosted briefly with me on this. So let's say I want to create a variable with his eye color in. I want to create a variable with his fur color, and I want to create a variable with his breed, for example. Now, with our current knowledge, you might be tempted to create 3 variables, one for each of those attributes. But because they really do belong together, they are like properties, or they are properties that should be grouped. We group them in what is known as an object. I'm going to show you how to put one together now, and then how to access properties within it. So I'm going to create a new variable. I'm going to call this Moo, because that's the name of my dog. And objects start with these squiggly brackets here. And then each property you write out. So I said I'll just say it could be eye color, colon, and then the value to the right hand side of the colon. Now, let me do that. He has brown eyes, as it happens. Now, this is something that often trips people up when they're starting to learn JavaScript. Here we're using an equals, and here we're using a colon. I believe pretty much always we will be using equals, and the only time we will use colons is when we are using objects, at least in the context of our workshops. So this is now a property and a value. In some programming languages, in some contexts, you will hear these called keys and values. And then we can put multiple properties in here. What's important though is that we comma separate them. So we've comma separated it. And now we can put in here, what else did I say? Fur color. He actually has a couple. So let's do an array, because it doesn't just have to be strings. So he has a bit of brown fur. He also has a bit of white fur. And then next, I said a breed. He's a Jack Russell. I'll just write Jack. There we are. So now all of these values, let's do his age as well, just to get a number thrown in there. Age, he is 3. He's 3.5. There we are. So this is an object for my dog Moo. It has an eye color, which is a string. It has a fur color, which is an array, which has strings in it. Again, arrays don't just have to have strings; they can have other data types in there. It has a breed, which is a string, and it has an age, which is a number. Remember, in JavaScript, numbers, whether or not they're decimal points or not, are just numbers. There's no differentiation between them by default. Okay, so let's console log Moo, and let's run that primer again. Wonderful, and there's our whole object. What happens if we want to get individual items though is we write the name of the object, dot, and then the name of the property. And there we are, there's the individual value. What's interesting is objects can be nested, so I can say stuff like names I call him. This can be an object too. So this could include things like real name. Well, his real name's Moo. The name I give him when he's tired is I call him Bean. You know what? I'm not going to put the name in when he's barking too much. I don't think that's right for this stream. But now in here, I could, in the console log here, I can go moo.names I call him. And this is one nice thing about code editors is they're aware of the code. So as you can see, this can autofill for me rather than me always having to type everything manually. And then I can go .real because that is a nested object. Let's run that again. And now we get this value here. So that's an object. We spoke about putting strings in them, arrays in them, numbers in them, and also nested objects as well. This is important because we will be actively using this during the workshop, which we'll be getting onto in about 5 minutes. Now the next thing in JavaScript, and the next thing in most programming languages, are functions. So I want you to, I always use the same example here. I think I'm going to stick with my normal example. So I'm going to create a set of instructions to create a sandwich. They're not going to be particularly, it's not going to be a particularly complex sandwich. So I'm going to say, I'm just going to go straight with console logging here. I'm not going to create loads of variables. So first string, put down a slice of brown bread because I'm a healthy boy. Oh, you may have also noticed this semicolon here. Generally we put them at the end of lines. In most times you can omit them. You probably have noticed me omitting them. You'll see a bit of inconsistency here and there because often when the code editor auto-completes lines for you, it puts it in there. So just be aware of that. Right, the next instruction is going to be put in a slice of cheese, and then finally console.log put down the other slice of brown bread. Not my most inspired sandwich. Right, fantastic. I go ahead, run this. There's my 3 lines. All good, brilliant. Now I'm going to ask you to create a second one. Now you might be tempted with your current knowledge to just copy all of this like this. Wonderful. Now we do indeed have 2 sandwiches, but we're repeating our code twice. There are multiple ways to handle this, but what we're going to do is create a function called makeSandwich, and we're going to put these 3 lines inside of the function. Then instead of needing to write all 3 lines every time, we can just run the function. So I've just got rid of that second iteration of the sandwich. So to create a function, we're going to start by writing the word function, and next we're going to give that function a name. I'm going to call it makeCheeseSandwich. Next we put 2 brackets like so. I will explain what these brackets do in just a moment, and I mean it. I will come back to them in just a moment. And then I'll put some squiggly brackets in here, and my code for the function simply goes in here. So I'm going to take these, I'm going to cut them, I'm just going to get rid of those lines. I'm going to pop those in here. This white space doesn't matter, but just because it's nicer to look at, I'm going to indent those again. That will not alter your code, however. It will work either way, exactly the same. And now, what happens if I run this node program again? The answer is nothing, because we've created this function. Now we actually need to call it and make it happen. In order to call a function, we just write the name of the function followed by those 2 rounded brackets like so. Save that, and run it again. And there's our 3 instructions. We can run this 2, 3 times if we want, and all we need to do now is call the function multiple times like so. And there we are, that has happened 3 times like so. Now I'm going to ask you to go ahead and make me I don't know what another type of sandwich is. I normally eat cheese sandwiches. A ham sandwich. There we go. We'll make a ham sandwich. So we're going to create a function to create a ham sandwich like so. We're just going to go make ham sandwich. Wonderful. That's going to say ham instead. But stop. That was very dramatic, but stop. We're still repeating a lot of our code here. The core functionality of this function is the same. We don't need to do this. There is a way to utilize these little brackets I said I would come back to in order to make our function a little more flexible for, if example, we want to change the filling of our sandwich. And they're known as, the way they're framed change. Sometimes they're called parameters, sometimes people call them options, sometimes people call them arguments. I really apologize, I am likely to flip between words, but for now we will call them parameters. And we can put in the name of parameters here, and these are options that we will need to provide whenever we run this function. So I'm going to call this one filling. Note, I didn't put quotes around it, I just wrote the word filling. For all intents and purposes, this value acts as a variable that we can access anywhere between these squiggly brackets. So instead of saying put in a slice of cheese, I'm going to say let's put in a slice of, and then add to it the item that we pass into it. And we'll talk about how strings get added to strings in a moment. I also think we can just call this make sandwich now because it's a more general function. So this one will be make sandwich too. And now in these brackets, we provide the value that will become filling when this function is run. So we'll call this one cheese, and then we'll make another one, and we'll call that one ham. We'll run the function like so, and you'll see here, this one has cheese, and this one has ham. So instead of needing to build a whole nother function, we can use the same function again for another purpose. You can also add multiple parameters, you comma separate them. So let's call this one bread, and we can go in and add the color of the bread in here, bread. Now you may have noticed when we added a string to a string, what it actually results in is just one longer string. What's important is to know where your kind of hard-coded string ends. That's where these quotes are, and then where the dynamic values are. So in this case, this is a hard-coded string, this is dynamic, this is a hard-coded string, and we need to have the pluses in between them. We're going to do the same here. And bread. So now not only do we need to pass in a filling, we must pass in a bread color. Now we run it one more time, and there we are. We have a cheese sandwich on white bread. So this is a function. A function does not have to have a parameter. It can have one, it can have multiple. They don't have to be strings, they can also be numbers, they can be objects, and in some cases they can be functions as well. We're not going to cover that right now. Finally, we are going to talk a little bit about methods, and then I promise we'll get onto the main bulk of this workshop. So a method is a function that is part of an object. So let's show you what a method may look like. So we're going to go back to the example where we had an object for my dog, who you may or may not be able to hear barking his little head off right now. And we can create a value. And this can be a function itself. Notice in this context, I haven't given the function a name. I've just gone straight to the brackets. That's because we can refer to this. So whatever happens here, whatever happens in this function will be run whenever we call moo.sayHi, like so. So that's known as a method. Now, built-in data types have some methods. So for example, if I go and create the age, and I'm going to be really pedantic and say I'm 21 point decimal value, we can console log the age, that'll all come out. But I can also go I can also go math.floor age and log that. 21. You'll see floor rounds down, ceiling rounds up, and then just rounds to whatever's closest. Now the interesting thing about this is these are built-in methods to JavaScript, but that doesn't mean that methods don't exist in third-party libraries or perhaps your own code as well. I'm going to show you a couple more. So I'm going to go back to the very first thing we did, the name. There's my name, and I'm going to console log name dot and then 2 lower case with the brackets because it's a method. And that will push the value to lowercase. There's also a 2 uppercase as well, and there are loads of others. There are loads of things here. I'm not going to go through any more of the built-in methods. We will be using 1 or 2 during the workshop though. Know that most kind of baked-in data types have some methods, and these are common operations that you can do without you needing to do all of the heavy lifting. The language features do that for you. So that was the primer. We covered quite a lot. We covered what node is. We covered types, and within that we covered numbers. We covered strings. Remember, strings look like this. We covered arrays and for loops. We covered objects, including nested objects. We spoke a little bit about functions, and then finally we spoke about methods. I think that's a really good primer to pretty much explain most of what's going to go on in this workshop. But what I really encourage you to do is if something isn't making sense, just pop a little message in the chat. I'll take some time. I will make sure things are clarified, because if something isn't sitting right with you, chances are it won't sit right with someone else either. Okay. So let's crack on with the real workshop. So there are a few things we're going to need in order to get started. Firstly, we are going to need a tool called ngrok. That's spelled like this, ngrok. Now what ngrok lets you do is take applications that run on your computer, and it allows you to make them accessible to anyone on the internet using a public URL. Now, you would get a very similar result if you were to take your code and you were to upload it to a public server and give people a way to access that. But that's quite a lot of overhead. It's not a great experience. And so what ngrok lets you do is take whatever's live on your computer in a particular port and make that public to the web. The URLs are just temporary, so every time you shut ngrok down and start it back up, it will come up with a new URL for you. I'm telling you that because it's an important stumbling block that a lot of people get hung up on. So over in your terminal now, I want you to firstly open up your Facebook bot folder in Visual Studio Code if you haven't already, or whatever code editor you're using. And in your terminal, now I'm going to be referring to the Visual Studio Code terminal, which is baked in, but you could be using any terminal or any command line or PowerShell that's on your computer, but I will pretty much always be referring to the Visual Studio Code one here. And I want you to type in npx ngrok space http space and then 3000 and hit enter. Give that just a moment, and what that is going to do is run ngrok on your computer, and it will take whatever application is running on our computer at port 3000, and it will make that available to the live internet. And what's most important there is the Vonage APIs require the ability to hit a live, active, working URL. And so now the Vonage APIs can hook into your application and use the features that we're building. Now you have to leave this working. I'm going to just make this a little taller here so you can see here. You'll notice this ngrok URL like so. We're going to need to just take note of this. You'll be able to refer to it later as well. And just remember, if you shut ngrok down or shut your terminal and restart it, this URL will change. I'll tell you in a few places where it really matters that you definitely have the version, the URL that is live. Now I want you to open another terminal. So if you have Mac OS terminal or the command line or PowerShell open a new window and leave this one open in the background. Leave it open throughout. Visual Studio Code, you can just press this little plus button here, and then you can toggle between them using this drop down. So we'll do our work in this second one, but know that ngrok is running in the background like so. So I'm going to close this file. We don't really need it at this point. Now, the next thing we're going to need before we start writing some code is we're going to need a Facebook page. So you can go to facebook.com/pages/create, and I think the community or public figure kind of flow is quicker. I think it asks you fewer questions, but go ahead and do that and make a page. I've already done this. I don't necessarily need to go ahead and make yet another dud page for the sake of a workshop, but go ahead and make a page. You're going to need that again in a moment. I would also encourage you to go to the About section of your page, click on the Facebook Messenger link, and just send yourself your page just like a full stop or something, just so it shows up in your little messages tab. And in fact, I have here a page I set up, and all I did was send to it a full stop just so it showed up here in Facebook Messenger. Yeah, so it means you can quickly access this this chat later. Okay, so you've got your Facebook account, you've made a page, and next thing you're going to need is a Vonage API account. So if you head over to developer.nexmo.com, the spelling of that in slightly bigger text is in the stream graphic just up here. So developer.nexmo.com up here. And you're going to go and click Get an API key up here. And you can go ahead and sign up for an account. I'm going to go and log into my account. Wonderful. You know what I'm going to do? I'm just gonna do a little overlay thing just while I do this bit. I forgot that my password manager is really aggressive at logging me out. And I'm going to go and log into my account. And hopefully at this point you've had enough time to sign up for an account. I think you need to verify a phone number if I'm not mistaken. It's given you time to go and do that as well. And I am, yeah, I think that is the important bit. Now just a note here, when I've done this workshop in the past, a few people had issues signing up for an account, and all of them had the same browser extension. They had uBlock Origin, and for some reason that was stopping them signing up. If you're hitting issues, just consider just turning off the extension for just a moment while you sign up for an account and log in, then by all means turn it back on. But that seemed to have been an issue recently. I don't know what it is, but just know that you might be hitting the same issues. Now I'm gonna take away this now. So you're gonna need to take note of this, your API key, and you're gonna need to take note of this, your API secret, as is made quite clear by the way it is shown. You should not be sharing your secret with anyone, including me. Don't show it to anyone. Take note of it. Know this is where you come get it. This is where you go when you log in. It's the little getting started tab, like so. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to link our Facebook page with our Vonage API account. Now, in order to do this, we're going to open a new tab and we're going to go to messenger.nexmo.com. Now, what's really important here is that it's definitely prepended with https://. And we go in, and now your page will look slightly different. You will need to log in. You will need to, grant access to your pages. You can select which pages as well. So you can see here I have a few pages that are connected. So you can select on a per page basis. And you're going to need to provide your API key and your API secret, and then hit subscribe. And once you've done that, you've successfully linked the two. Now again, if you're hitting any issues, I really encourage you to just hit up the chat. I've kind of got it open in my peripheral vision, and I'll take pause and I'll make sure that everyone can get through it together. So at this point, you've now set up your page, you've linked it to your Vonage API account, which you have. One other thing that's worth noting is if you drop down your face here, and there's this little coupons tab here. And there's a little coupon just above my head, here, up there. And so go ahead, you can put that coupon in, and that will give you 10 euros of credit, which will be more than enough. It goes surprisingly far, and it'll also lift restrictions on your account, so you can use it fully, and we're going to need that today. So I'm just going to take this moment because there was quite a lot going on there. You need to sign up for a page, you need to sign up for an account, there's coupons, there's some keys and secrets you need to fiddle with. I'm just going to give you a couple of moments to do that. And I am going to ask the chat a question for those of you who have kind of got this sorted. This is obviously a friendly stream. I really want to get to know people who are watching it a little better. So I really want to know, what have you been working on this week? What cool stuff have you been working on? While you rush to your keyboards and tell me everything, this week I built a little Facebook Messenger bot that plays chess between two people. So you can play chess and it counts down the timer only once someone has seen the board, not from when we send the message, which is pretty cool. So I'll give you a couple of moments if you're interested. Don't feel obliged to share all. What cool things have you been working on this week, or what have you learnt this week? Oh, you know what? I also learnt about something really cool. I learnt about the... hang on. This is not... I did not plan to do this shill for my Twitter, but I did share it here. Where is it? Dude, this is really cool. So in the Safari preview, there's a new CSS property for line height. Because 1em should have been the height of a text, but it isn't always. And line height is perfectly aligned between the top and bottom of the line height, even if there's spacing. I think that's pretty cool. So I learned that this week. That's stuck. I keep thinking about it. Still just in a preview. Cool. Beth, you made your first call with JavaScript today. Sweet. We'll be doing that in a couple of weeks on the stream, so you can learn how to use our voice API. Congratulations. That's really cool. What did you find the most difficult thing in doing that, if there was anything in particular? And maybe we can chat a little bit about that while I give people time to grab their accounts. Ooh, Saif, you've been working on recording a YouTube video, creating a script using Python and Cloudflare to update a DNS record with your current IP address. Create a script using Python? Oh, that's very cool. Yeah, congrats. I would love to know if you've done any other YouTube videos. I know it's a slightly weird time where we're all getting used to changing the way we present things to do it. Right now, I am talking to an empty room and yet all of you, and that's still somewhat weird. I imagine recording YouTube videos is also a little peculiar. Feel free to tell me more about what you... Oh, Beth, the most difficult thing about making a call with JavaScript, identifying the JSON web token when it was returned was challenging, but you made it. Congratulations. That is challenging. We will almost certainly be talking about JSON web tokens at a later point in time. I think I've given people a little while to go ahead and do that. If you still need a little bit, just shout in the chat. I'll take pause at another point shortly. We're also at the point where I don't need to have my Facebook page open anymore, so I'm probably going to go ahead and close that. And we're going to go and close this as well. So let's get to the point now where we are going to create an application inside of our Vonage API dashboard. So I'm very sorry about my co-host. He's very excited to be on the stream. So we're going to go here to your applications. We're going to create a new application up here. Now there are a few things we need to provide. Firstly, we are going to provide a name. This is just a nice friendly name, so you know what it's called. I'm going to call this Facebook bot stream. You can call it anything you want. The next thing we're going to do is we are going to generate a public and private key pair. Now we're not going to talk too much about this, but essentially we are going to be using this private.key to authenticate ourselves when we're using the Vonage API. The public key just sits here, and the two of them together helps the Vonage API platform know we are who we say we are. Now that's gone into my downloads folder, so I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to go ahead. There's the private.key. I'm going to open another one. I'm going to go into the desktop. There's my Facebook bot folder. I'm just going to move that private key over to the folder just so we know where it is later and we're not trying to remember. So there we are. That's over there on my desktop. The next thing we're going to do is turn on the messages feature, which is currently in beta. So that is there. And we have to provide two pieces of information. We need to provide a URL which will be hit by the Vonage API platform. This URL will have data sent to it whenever we get an incoming message from a user. And the second one is actually related to when we send messages. The status endpoint helps us know, for example, has a message been sent? Has it been delivered? Has it been read? In this application, we're not going to do anything with those, but both endpoints need to exist, and both endpoints will eventually need to respond to our API so it knows that it's hit it successfully. Now, this is that point where you need that ngrok URL. So let me go back over to the first one, because even though I said take note, I didn't. You're going to need this HTTPS one here. So I'm going to copy that. And the inbound one is going to be that URL without the space at the beginning. Oh, without the space at the beginning. And let's just go /inbound. So this URL obviously doesn't exist yet, but we're going to need to make it exist, and it's going to need to respond to the API. And this second one here, we're just going to go /status. But we need both. They both need to exist, and they both need to respond to the Vonage API. Finally, we're going to hit generate new application. This is our new application. Next we are going to go to, so this is our application, wonderful. We can do a number of things with this. We can link Vonage virtual phone numbers. We can link WhatsApp accounts, Viber accounts. What we can also do is we can link our Facebook page. So this is the page here. So I'm just going to hit link. There we are. And that's now linked to this application. So now when we message that page, it will go ahead and it will send a message. It will send the contents of that message to this URL, which ngrok is kind of forwarding on to our local computer on an application running on port 3000, which doesn't exist yet. So we're going to need to do that very shortly. So this is everything we need to do over here. You will also need to take note of this application ID. I might leave this page open just so I can refer back to it later a little bit easier. So fantastic. Next, we are going to go to our code editor. Now we're going to actually start doing what we need to do to build the Facebook bot. All of that was set up. I know it's taken a little while, but I wanted to make sure that we spent enough time going through all of the basics. So this bit was a little bit easier. So we are going to install dependencies. So dependencies are other pieces of code that other people have written. So in order for this to make sense, I probably need to explain what Npm is. So Npm is Node Package Manager. It contains thousands of packages built by other developers, which you can include in your JavaScript projects in the same kind of consistent way because they're all hosted on Npm. So we can go and pull down those code snippets and they exist inside of our application. The nice thing about it is when we do this, it will store the information around which packages we're getting in a single file, a single text file. And then instead of needing to share this big set of dependencies, all of this code written by other people in our project, we just need to share the one file, and that file will tell people which dependencies they need to get. It'll tell the program which dependencies it needs to get. Probably the easiest way to do this is to show you. So back in our terminal, make sure we're in the right folder here. So desktop and Facebook bot. And we are going to type in npm init for initialize space and then -y. Hit enter. And it's created this package.json file. We don't need to really care about the package.json file, but what we are now going to do is install some dependencies, and hopefully you'll see what happens to this file here. I'm going to scroll down a little bit. So we are going to type in npm install space, and now we can download or rather install, include in our project, multiple dependencies, and all we need to do is space separate them, so we can do it all in one command. So we're going to install Express. We're going to install body parser. We're going to, and remember that has a dash for a space, dash in between the two words. We are going to install Nexmo, the @ sign and the word beta. So this will install the beta version of the Node library for our APIs. And this is because Messages is still in beta, so we're going to need the beta version in order to use those. And then finally, NEDB. Hit enter. Now, while that's installing, I want to talk to you about what each of them do. So Express is a web application framework. If you're building kind of anything that needs to do a call and response with a server, Express is a tool that lets you do that. Body Parser is what is known as a body parsing middleware. Essentially what it means is when we get inbound messages, it allows us to dip in and access those in a nicer way. The Nexmo library, as I mentioned, is our Node client, so it allows you access to use our APIs in a slightly nicer and more JavaScript-centric way. And then finally, AnyDB is a database. What's worth noting about AnyDB is really it's not that suitable for anything too serious, but the way we use it is pretty much exactly the same as using another database technology called MongoDB, which is a little more battle tested and ready to use in more serious applications. However, it takes more time to set up, so instead of fiddling around with that today, we're going to use AnyDB because it's easier. You'll see shortly why it might not be too suitable. So hopefully you've got all of those dependencies installed. Sometimes it can take a little while. Hopefully you are with me and you have got everything ready. And if not, we'll take another pause in a little bit. So hopefully things will be done by then. And what we're going to do is create a new file called index.js. Now again, it doesn't really matter what it's called, but package.json by, well, maybe not. You know what? Ignore what I'm going to say. Index.js is a very common name for like the main file in a Node.js application. And what we're going to do here is set up our web server with Express. So we're going to create a new variable called app. And the value of that will be the include of that dependency that we installed. Because while we now have Express available to us in our application, we now actually need to include it. So the way we do this is we go require is a function, it requires a value, and that is a string with the name of the package, so Express. And then we're just going to do two other squiggly brackets here. This is just a little bit of a shorthand, otherwise we need to write like 3 or 4 lines of code. We only need to do this when we are creating the Express when we are requiring Express. Next we are going to create body parser. So we're going to include body parser. So we'll do that in very much the same way, require body parser. Again, I'm using that convention where every subsequent word has a capital. Oh, that says vonst. It should say const. Next, we're not going to do const. Next, we're going to configure our application with a few settings. So this is all Express stuff. So we're going to go app.use bodyparser.json. That is a method that is telling our application what we're going to do is we're going to use the body parser middleware and things it returns will be in a JSON format. And then finally, just a little bit more body parser config. You don't need to worry too much about this. This is very standard code for pretty much every web application. So we're going to go URL encoded. This is a method. Its value is an object, and we can pass in extended true. We don't need to worry too much about this though. So that is our Express server setup. And the final thing we need to do is actually get it going and have it serving our application on a port. So we do this using app.listen, a port number, and remember we've already told ngrok it should be listening at 3000, so we're going to use 3000. And the second value is a function. Now, this function, notice it has no name because it's passed in here as a value. And this function will run once your server is listening. And I'm just going to console log in here. Console log, all good and dandy. Wonderful. Let's run index.js. Remember that's node space and index.js. And you can see there, it says all good and dandy. And you'll notice it hasn't given me another line. It hasn't given me the ability to like type a new line. That's because that is now running permanently until we kill the application, until we stop it running. Now the way you stop it running is by hitting Control-C, and that stops this application running. And then again, remember you can go up and enter in order to continue running it. All the code we write subsequently is going to go here in this little space. So at this point, I'm just going to drop that down like so. Wonderful. So we've now created an Express application. And the next thing we're going to do is we are actually going to create those event handlers. But I'm going to just take pause for a moment. We've started to write some code, and I just wanted to ask, are there any concepts currently that aren't making sense? So I'll kind of hang on this for a couple of minutes, make sure I can clarify things as they've gone so far, just so everyone's on the same page. I'll expand that further. Are there any general JavaScript concepts you might be struggling with, whether or not we've covered them? Because I might be able to weave them into the rest of this workshop or future workshops if it's something you're not quite comfortable with. So yeah, is there anything so far that isn't making sense? Equally, if things are working, tell me in the chat, tell me everything's good. These couple of lines are a little tricky. You can think about them mostly as kind of configuration for Express that just allows us to grab those inbound messages in a nicer and more consistent way. Okay. I'm just going to go with everything's fine and dandy then. Everything's good and dandy. No, I like fine and dandy more. It's fine and dandy. All right, let's continue it and create those handlers. So our web application will have a number of endpoints. Each endpoint consists of two parts. It has a path. For example, a path could be /hello or /name/Kevin. And it also has a method. Now, when an incoming request happens, it will come in as a post request. So the way we do this is we type in app dot, and then we put in the method. I'll talk to you a bit more about these methods in a moment, but post. And this is a method, so we whack a couple of brackets in there. And the first value that we're going to pass into this method is the path. So we're going to say /inbound, because that's what we said to the Vonage API application that we set up, is where we should send the inbound messages. And the second value is going to be a function. This function has two parameters. It has one called request, and it has one called response. And all of our logic that will be executed when this endpoint is hit will go in here. Now let's take a moment and talk about what this post word means, what these methods mean. So Express supports a number of these methods. These are known as HTTP methods. As I said, there are several of them. The most common ones you will interact with are get, and that will just grab data. So you'll generally use that when you're like getting data from a database. It might be a bit of user data. It might be a list of every customer, that kind of thing. You're just getting data. And the second is post. Post requests is where you are sent data. There are others. There's like a delete method. There's put and patch and options and a whole world of them. But the ones we need to worry about today are get and post. And in fact, we're only going to be building post endpoints. But it's worth noting get is another very, very common endpoint type. So as I said, this endpoint, this post request to /inbound will be hit with some data whenever a message is sent to our page. So what we're going to do is we're going to console.log the request. And because we use body parser, we can get just the data that's being sent to us, because request is a body, request is an object using the body property. So request is an object, and the data we want is going to be in .body, and that's because of body parser. And then finally, as I mentioned, we need to send something back to our API, just so it knows, yes, I successfully hit this endpoint. Otherwise, periodically, we will try and hit this endpoint again. So you might end up in a situation where actually the first time, for example, you didn't respond with anything. And that means we'll hit it again and again and again. And instead of just getting one message in, you might end up with 2, 3 or more. So just be aware we have to send something back. The simplest way to do this is to go response.status. That's a method, value 200, that's a number, so no string, and then just .end, and that is a method too. This is this is an HTTP status. There's a whole bunch of them. You are probably familiar with 404, which means not found. There are a whole bunch of them though. 200 just means everything's good. Everything's fine here. Again, dependent on your real world application, you may want this to be another HTTP code that better describes what's happening. So 200 means everything's okay. For example, I think 422 means like the data that's come in is malformed, and there's you don't have access. There's also like server issue response codes as well. All we need to care about, 200 means everything's good, and that's what we're going to do. And then hopefully you remember me saying that we also need to respond to the /status endpoint. So even though we're not going to do anything with it for this workshop, we're just going to create it. We're just going to copy and paste the inbound, and we're going to just change that out for /status, like so. We're going to save that. Now, we changed our code, but the node server is still running. We have to close it. We do that with Control-C. Or if you can't find that, or that isn't working, just shut your terminal and reopen it. It's not the nicest, like try and find the keyboard shortcut. Generally it's Control-C. We're going to run our application again. Now we're going to see if we can get some inbound messages. I'm going to make this nice and big like so. I'm going to open this message with the page, and I'm going to go, hello there. Wonderful. And we'll see here in our terminal, we have this. This is great. This means we are able to receive inbound messages. Well done. As you can see, it is an object. So request.body is an object. It has a message UUID. This is a unique identifier for this very specific message from this user at this point in time. This is unique for every single message you get in. We have to. Now, to is an object that has two properties, an ID and a type. We have a from, which is an object with an ID and a type. We'll talk more about those in a moment. We have a timestamp. This is when this happened. We have a direction, whether it's inbound or outbound. And finally, we have, now that we have to just, let's focus here. We have message, which is an object, which contains content, which is an object, which contains a type and some text. Let's talk about some of these items in a bit more depth. So this message is from this ID. That means that this ID is my Facebook account. Every Facebook account has a numerical ID associated with it. The to is where I sent the message to. So this is the ID for my page. And finally, this is the text that we actually sent. You may have noticed, as I said, that it has a type of text. It could have a type of image. There are some others that are supported. You can check it out in our documentation. But for this workshop, we're just going to be dealing with text. But just know that this type is important because it denotes that there are multiple types implicitly by it even existing. Wonderful. So we're getting that value in like so. So this is request.body. Just remember, if that wasn't working for you, just check ngrok is running, check the URL in ngrok. Also check that your Vonage application has the right ngrok URL in it. Remember, if you shut it and reopen it, that URL will change. These are the common things that are often wrong. And yes, this is an object. So hopefully going through those data types at the beginning means you're recognizing what you're seeing. Also, just to note that if this isn't working for some reason, you can always console log other things just to try things out. You might console log just the request, or you might console log something like test. And if test prints to the console, to the terminal here, that means that we are successfully getting the data. Otherwise, this would never run. It's just you're not accessing it correctly. We're going to just keep that on request.body there. So the next thing we're going to do is, now that we've got this message coming in, is that we're going to store it in a database. So the first thing we need to do is we need to set up our database, and then we're going to need to store this message. We may as well just store, honestly, this whole object, not all of that, this whole object in our database. So as I mentioned, there are lots of databases available, lots of technologies, many of which will be hosted online for you, or you can go and host them online. This workshop uses a very, very easy database called NEDB, which works by just storing these JavaScript objects in a file on your computer in this folder. And that's great because it's really nice and easy. You can quite easily go in and look at the data, but in practice you're not going to want to deal with this type of database. It's not very secure, it's also not very extensible, it's not very scalable, but for this it's absolutely fine. So remember, we installed NEDB as a dependency. We can see that here in package.json dependencies. There's NEDB here, and that was when we typed in npm install and the different packages. So as a result, that is here. So now we're going to go. And we're going to require NEDB. So we're going to, not caps, not tabbing. Come on, Kevin. Const, and we are going to we'll just call this NEDB, and we're going to require NEDB, same as before. So now we have included the library, required it. Now we need to initialize it and actually create a database that we can interact with. And in order to do this, we're going to create a new variable. We'll just call this one messages. And what we're going to do here, just watch my syntax, is we're going to write the word new, and then we're going to type in NEDB. So we're going to create a new instance of an NEDB database. This is a method. It's not a method, sorry, but we put brackets in. And what we can put in here, though, are some options. And the options go in a parameter, which is an object. So we are going to create one called file name. This is going to be where our actual file lives. I'm just going to call it messages.db. And that means it will create this database and use this database using a file called messages.db. And because I've just put the name of it in, it will create it in the same folder as index.js. We should see it here in the sidebar in a little bit. And we're also going to pass in autoload. An autoload is a property which can be true or it can be false. In fact, that's just reminded me, when we were doing data types at the beginning, I missed this quite critical data type, which is a Boolean. Booleans can either be true or false. You don't put strings around them, but it's just true or false. So just know that that's a data type that exists as well. So autoload true. And now that we've done this, it means that we have a messages database ready to go. In fact, if I restart the node server, you'll notice this messages.db file has automatically appeared. It will create it if it doesn't already exist, and it will just use it if it does exist. So that's wonderful. We've done that successfully. Next thing we're going to do inside of our inbound endpoint is I'm just going to get rid of this console.log. We have reference to what it looks like here if we need to later. But we can go messages, which is our database, .insert. This is a method. And this method takes two values. The first value is an object that we are going to store in the database. Now, if you'll remember, I said that request.body actually is an object already. So we can just throw the whole thing in. You might want to do something a bit more clever. You might want to take certain values out, or you might want to create a new value using some of what was provided to you. But for the sake of this, we're just going to throw it all in the database. And then the second value is a function. And this function will run once this insert method has completed. It's what's known as a callback. And so this takes two values. It takes an error, and it doesn't matter what you call it, but this is the actual document, the record that exists in the database. It will return it back to you. And so what we're going to do here is we're going to say if there's an error, because there might not be an error, it might not exist, but if there is an error, let's console.log that there was an error, and then whatever the error message actually is. So it will always say the word error, that's hard coded, and then this is dynamic, whatever it told us the error was. And then under here, we can go else. And in here, we're going to just go console log, and we're going to say new record. And let's just go record, and we can see what it looks like. In fact, as I'm going through this, and I'll take this as a note for next time, I'm realizing there are a few concepts I've forgotten. This is another one, an if statement. So the way this works is, well, in fact, I think it's fairly readable, but we'll go through it. You write the word if, then some brackets, and then a value in here, and this value will either be true or false. If a value doesn't exist, it will be false. And if a value does exist, as long as it is not false or 0 or null or other things that specifically mean false, then it will be true. So if error exists, we'll do this. And if error does not exist, we'll do this. So let's go ahead and save that. We'll restart the server. Oh, there's an error. Let's take a look at what that error is. Wonderful. I said this plus was needed earlier and I missed it. Fortunately, it tells you exactly where the error is, so I was able to find that quite easily. We're going to run that. All fine and dandy. Let's go over here. Please store me. Wonderful. New record. All right, it says object, but we'll talk about that in a moment. But if we go to messages.db, there's our message. Please don't pop this up again. There we go. There it is. In fact, I'm just going to wrap so we can see it a little better. It's exactly what we got from the Vonage API from Facebook, with one addition. There is this underscore ID property, and what underscore ID is a value created by any DB, which is unique. And this means even if you have two values that look identical, their IDs will not be identical as long as you created them using any DB. So we use this as a unique identifier. As it happens, the Vonage API also provides a unique identifier, but so does any DB. So just know any DB provides this underscore ID. Next, why did this say object? This is just a quirk of trying to print objects, console log objects to the terminal. Yeah, sometimes it does this if they're large objects. So what we can do, just to check it works, is we can go record._ID. I'll just do an A. Oh, forgot to restart the server. I'll just do a B. This is how we're going to tell them apart. Wonderful. New record, and there's the ID, as we can see. YON is what it said. There we are. Y or Y0N. There we are. That's there. Congrats. We've now stored some data in a database. This is, if you really have joined us from zero and you've been able to follow us all the way through, or even if you were just wanting a primer because perhaps you're a little rusty or lack some confidence, this is a huge achievement. Working with databases when I started to code was the thing that really scared me. I started as a web designer and then doing a little bit of JavaScript in the browser. Dealing with databases in any form was really scary, and I hear that over and over again from other people. So even though this maybe isn't production ready and you'll want to learn something a little more robust, this is still a huge achievement. And just know that if you are using MongoDB, you can still use .insert. It looks the same. This part is all the same. The only difference is how you initialize and connect to those databases. So you're also not a million miles from being able to do that. So the next thing we're going to do is send a message in response, because we know it's stored in the database, but that's because we're hovering over this DB file and watching it like a hawk. As a user, I've got 0 in response. So we're going to want to do something to respond back to the users. Now, there are a few steps in order to do this, and this is where our API comes in useful. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to initialize, we're going to include and initialize the Nexmo node library. So the way we're going to do that is we're going to go const, and we're going to create a new variable, and we're going to require Nexmo, like so. Next, we're going to initialize it. So the way we do this is by creating a new variable. You can call it anything you want. I'm going to call it client, but you can call it anything. So client. And this is going to be a new instance of the Nexmo library. This also takes an object which has all of the settings, same as here. Because there weren't that many, I did these on the same line, but equally, this could have gone like this, just to make it a little more readable. And we're doing the same down here. Okay. There are 4 things we need to pass in here. The first is your API key from your dashboard. So if you don't have it to hand, which I imagine you probably don't at this point, go back to your dashboard, grab your API key. And that value will be passed in as API key. Remember, this casing is important. I'm not going to put my API and key and secret in here. I've got mine accessible using process.env.nextmo key, like so. But you can just put your string straight in here. Remember, the strings have quotes around them and you just put the strings straight in there. If you are sharing this code with anyone though, remember to nip those out before you share it, because otherwise people can use your account, including all of your billing, and have full access, and we don't want that. So we have the API key. The next thing is the API secret. Again, I'm not going to share this with you. I'm just going to do process.env.nextmo secret, which is where I've made this accessible. It is still just a string, but you can just put your string straight in there. Hello, Tom. Thank you very much for joining us. Very good to see you. It's been a while. I hope you are keeping well and safe in these times. The next thing we're going to pass is the application. Let's type correctly. The application ID. This is a string. Now, another thing to note, you'll notice I've been using single quotes here. I've been using double quotes in other places. Does not matter. You can mix and match them as long as for any given instance you're using the same ones, both sides. It's my application ID. I'm going to go back to my dashboard, grab the application ID, and I'm going to paste that in there. Comma. Remember, this is an object, so we need to be comma separating them. And finally is your private key. Private key. Now, this is a string, and it's actually just a path to your private.key file. Private.key. The / means it's in this current folder. If you lost it or you don't have it available to you anymore, go regenerate those keys and make sure you have your private key in this folder. But that is just a path straight to this key file, which I'm not going to show you on the stream. So now we've initialized this client successfully. Now that we've done this, it's time to send a message. So once we have successfully created a record, let's respond to the user. We'll neaten this up a little bit in a moment, but let's just get it working. So in order to do this, we're going to need 3 pieces of information. We're going to need, and in fact, these should look familiar based on this object. Let me scroll back. This object that was returned to us. So we're going to need, I'm going to create these as variables. So I'm going to create a variable called to, and this variable is an object which has a type. I'll call it messenger, and an ID. Now this is going to be the person we are sending this message to. So let's just track through our object again. So in order to get to this point, it was request.body. Then once we were there, so this is who we're sending the message to. So it's who sent us the message. So from. So we're going to go .from, and then it's .id. So that's the ID. So remember, request.body is this object. Then we're going into from. Then we're going into ID, and that'll be this value, which is what we want. This is a little, I struggle with this still. You know, I'm saying to, I'm saying from. Just remember the inbound message, they're sending it to our page. It is from them. And when we're sending it in response, we're just flipping them. We're sending it back to them. So to will be, in this case, the from value from before. Ooh. Next, I'm actually just going to copy and paste this to save us some time. The next one is going to be from, and that will be to. And then finally, a message. This again will look exactly the same as this message here, as this message object. So it's going to have content. And again, just take note that objects can be on the same line. Excuse me, they can be more nicely formatted like this. It really doesn't matter. I generally keep these on the same line because the lines themselves aren't that long. You do whatever works for you. So we have content. Content is an object. Oh, content is an object. It has a type of text and text of whatever the message is. We got your message. Thanks. Great. So we've got these 3 variables. Now we actually need to use the client, which is this we initialized a Nexmo client into a variable called client. So we are going to go nexmo.channel.send, and this has three values, four values, sorry. All three of them, or the first three of them, are all objects, and the last one is a function. So the first three are mandatory, the fourth one is optional. We'll see why in a moment. So the first one is an object. It's going to be who we're sending the message to. And because this is an object, we can just refer to it by its variable name. The next is the page we're sending it from. The third is the message we're sending. That's also an object. And then the final one is optional, but highly recommended. It's what is known as a callback function. And this will run once we've attempted to send the message. It might have an error. It might not have an error. But if it has an error, we want to deal with that. I'm just going to go console.log error. This obviously is not very robust error handling, but that is a problem for another day, another workshop. And if there is no error, we can just say successfully sent message. Okay. Oh, there's quite a lot going on there. I am going to just nip my font size down one. Hopefully that's okay. It just makes us able to read a little bit more now that our function's getting a little on the larger side. I'm also going to wrap my text, which just means that even though this is on a new line, take note on the sides, this is all still the same line. It just means we can read everything. So we're going to restart this node server. We're going to send a message in. Go back to our code editor, and there was an error. Let's look at that. It didn't like nexmo.channel.send. Cannot read property send of undefined. That means send isn't the problem. Oh, it's because I said nexmo.channel.send. But actually our client's called client. So make sure you're using the right words there. Just to kind of talk you through my thought process here. It says cannot read property send of undefined. And that meant send wasn't the thing that was undefined here. It meant nexmo.channel was undefined. And that was undefined because I realized that I used the wrong object name here. That should be client. Let's try that again. Wonderful. We'll just say hi. Well, oh, I was a little hasty there. We got your message, thanks. And if yours is doing this as well, huge congrats. This is brilliant. This is like most of our workshop done. This is great. We're storing messages. We're responding so people know they got it. Let's take a look at the other things that were published here to the console. So you'll notice that these look a bit different. For example, they don't have a direction. We just see a status. That's because these are coming from that status endpoint that we set up at the beginning and I said we weren't going to bother with. So we see here, we submitted a message. You'll notice this ID here. Let's just note that it ends in 5E7. Then it was delivered, again, 5E7, same message. Then 5E7, it was read. And we can see exactly when all those things happened, timestamp wise, down to the millisecond, and then other information. So we can also tell the different states of delivery. Now, for the sake of our console not getting too busy, I'm actually going to remove this line. I just wanted to show you what that status endpoint actually does. That can be super useful. And we got a response. So this is great. There's quite a lot there. It's quite a lot there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just take a couple of minutes, have a chat with people who are in the chat, and this will just give you the ability to catch up if there are problems. Few notes, just remember the semicolons are not mandatory. You'll notice that even now I'm being a little inconsistent with them. They're not mandatory. And really the only spaces that matter are between constant let and the name of the variable. And it also matters in things like client.channel.send. There can't be spaces there because they're property. We're grabbing things from objects and spaces there don't work. But other than that, spaces don't matter too much. Remember white space, this kind of creating new lines sometimes and not other times. That doesn't matter too much. But take a look through it. I'm going to ask the chat at this point. This is a purely selfish question. Have you watched anything good recently? Because I'm starting to run out of stuff. And I need some new stuff to watch. Recently got Disney Plus, got Netflix, into both of them. So that can be where your recommendations lie. Got Amazon Prime in the UK, if that matters. So if you got any recommendations, just while I give people a couple of minutes to catch up, please give them to me. Recently, I've been watching Be Our Chef on Disney Plus. It's like a very wholesome family cooking competition. I've been enjoying that, but it doesn't bring joy. 6 episodes in, it's just a cooking show. So if there's anything else you can recommend, I would be very, very grateful. Just while I give people a couple of minutes to catch up. I'm also pretty desperate for TV shows, so honestly, I'll take anything. What else have we been watching recently? Oh yeah, I mean, Tiger King is like, it's there, we know it's there, but it's not, yeah, I know it's there. Haven't started watching it yet. I don't even know how to describe why I'm putting it off. It feels like a lot. So I'm kind of getting ready for it. American Horror Story, I've seen like the odd episode of. My understanding is that like each season is independent, but like it tells a story, right? So you really need to watch it the whole way through. I'm not sure if that's right. I've heard it's really good. Oh, the Tiger King. It's like watching a train wreck. You just can't look away. One of my friends recently watched the Fire Festival documentary, and as an event organizer in a previous life, that show gave me like the biggest amount of anxiety. Like just at every step, I felt that sinking feeling in my stomach. It was awful. What's Dickinson? I don't know anything about Dickinson. I've never heard of it. Folks copying your code, I'll give you another 20 seconds or so. Oh, the Fire doc. It's like, if it was so good and so bad, like, oh, Dickinson, a comedy based on Emily Dickinson on Apple TV Plus, which is not something I have, and there are some good things on it, but like, I can only have so many subscriptions. Race Across the World on BBC iPlayer. Is that very literal? Is it like a car show where they move between different countries? I mean, I have the tech. Oh no, I'm going to leave my code up. No, people copying your code. We'll come back in a moment. What is... Oh, Pairs of Couples Race Across the Globe. I have never heard of this. In a frenetic, I don't know this word. Anyway, race across the world. Travellers can choose any route they like, but no flights or smartphones allowed. Or smartphones. That's the twist. The American version of The Office is the only version of The Office. All right, so let's crack on. Thank you, by the way. There were some genuine gems in there that I will go away and look at afterwards. I appreciate it hugely. There's really only one other thing that we need to do functionality-wise, which is we need to build... I said at the beginning we would build like a recall word. So if you write like recall or replay, like we can pick the word, it doesn't matter. We will go back to the database and we will return to the user every message that we've received so far from them. But before we do that, it's probably worth noting there are a few other places that we might want to send messages back to the user, notably when there's an error. So we shouldn't just leave users wondering what's happening. And in order to do that, we would otherwise need to copy and paste all this code. So we're going to refer all the way back to the beginning. We're going to build a function for this. I'm going to cut this code onto my clipboard, just above this app.post endpoint. I'm going to create a new function. I'm going to call it function. I'm going to call it send message. I'm going to paste this code in. And what might change? Well, essentially all we can see changing, all I can see changing is who we're sending it to. I suppose where we're sending it from, but yeah, let's make this dynamic just so this application can be hosted elsewhere. And the actual message itself. Other than that, I think everything's good. So that's 3 parameters. I'll call them, just for ease, I'll call them sender, which will be us, the recipient, and we'll call it the text. You can call them anything you want, the things that are important about parameters are they have to come in this order, and whatever we call them up here is what we will call them inside of the function itself. So just bear that in mind. So we are going to send it to the recipient. You can use them whenever you want, so we don't have to use them in the order they're declared, but when we call send function, we need to pass the values in this order. It will come from the sender, and the text is just going to be the value of text here. So this is the property and the value. That might be a little gnarly for some people, but just this is the value, and this is the name of the property. So that's our send message function. Now let's actually call it. We have send message, 3 values. What order did we do them in? The sender, so the request dot body dot to dot id. That's the sender. Then we have request dot body dot from dot id, and then the message. We got your message. Wonderful. Just before we test this, let's copy and paste this up here. Let's just say there's been a problem. Oh, there has been a problem. Sorry. And remember, this problem will only happen if there was some kind of error with inserting the message into the database. I can't think of many reasons why this would happen, but sometimes things happen, especially with third-party libraries. We should be handling those errors and giving the user some form of response. Okay, let's restart our server. Let's pull this up a little. And let's keep that open. Let's open this. Let's send another one. This is another message. And we got your message. I don't know how to test this error sending, because I actually don't know how to throw an error into this. I don't know what is invalid, so if anything. So I'm just going to take that on face value, that's okay, because this one's okay. Oh. So the last thing we're going to do then is we're going to build the I'll call it recap. You can call it replay. You can call it anything you want, but I'm going to call it recap. When someone sends in the word recap, we're going to go to the database, retrieve their records, part 1. Then we're going to take all of those records. We're going to make a nice message with them, and then we're going to send that back to the user. When we do this, we're going to use a new method we've not seen before. It's a little bit more complex, but we'll talk through it. We'll get through it. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to go right to the top of this endpoint here, and the first thing we're going to want to do is check if the message we got is the keyword we're going to do something with. So we're going to do an if statement here, and we're going to check if request.body.message.content.text. I know that's a lot, but remember that is the full place where like the actual text someone has sent us lives in that big object. So request.body.message.content.text equals. Now when we're checking if things are equal, we use 2 or 3 equal signs in different contexts. We don't use 1. We use 1 when we're assigning values. So it's equal to recap. So if it's recap, we're going to do what we need to do. And if that is not the case, we're going to take this code and we're going to run it. So we're not going to run this code when someone hits recap. We don't need to store recap. We just need to store it if it's not recap. Now, one final note about this is not the same as this, which is not the same as this, or any other permutation of capitalization. So the way to kind of do a case insensitive check, which means it doesn't matter what the capitalization is we're going to use, remember right back at the beginning when I showed you the methods for text, I showed you the 2 lowercase. So what we're going to do is whatever they send us, we're going to make it lowercase, and then we're going to compare it against the lowercase version of the string. So it doesn't matter how they do their capitalization. So if the message is recap, regardless of the capitalization, we're going to do some stuff in here. The first thing we're going to do is let's just grab the records and see what it does. So the way we do this is we go messages, that's the name of our database, .find, this is a method, that takes an object as options. In fact, messages.find will work without that parameter, but it will grab every message from every user that's ever been sent to us, which is not what we want to do. So we can pass in this object, which is where we're going to put our options. And the options is going to be where from .id. Now for the key, for this part, where we're checking the database, if it's a top level, so if it was just from, you could just do it like this. This is what the docs say for any DB. But because we want to go in one layer into a nested object, you just have to put it in strings. You need to pass it in as a string. So if the from.id is the same as request.body.from.id, .from.id, i.e. get every message that came from this user. So the first parameter here is an object with options, and the next one is a callback function. This callback function might have an error, and then we'll call it records, and this will be all of the records as an array that the user has sent to us so far. Okay, so here is our function that will run. So we're going to do the same thing we normally do. We're going to go if there is an error, let's send a message. You know what, I'm actually just going to copy and paste this one because we'll just keep the error message the same. Because they'll never see both, because dependent on the message they sent us, we'll either be running this code or this code. So it can be the same error message. And if there is no error, then right now let's just console.log the records just to see how they look. So let's restart the server. Oh, there's an error. Yeah, the error here is let's take a look. Oh, this bracket here should have been down here. There we are. Because the first value is this object and the second value is the function, and they are all within this method call here. So that was in the wrong place. So let's save that. Let's try running it again. All right, all fine and dandy. So now we're going to try recap. All right, look at that. It's an array. I'm not sure if you saw that, I did here, these square brackets. It's an array of objects, and the objects are just what we have thrown into the database. So now we need to find a nice way of getting these values into a single message that will look good. And this is really, I think, the final key learning for this. And we're gonna talk about JavaScript functional programming. We're going to talk about .map. So let's take a look at this. So I'm going to create a new variable called message, and the value of message is going to be the records. But we want to do something with that. We want to make every item in records. In fact, I'm going to rename this into string records. We want to turn them into a string, not an object. And really, we only care about the text and maybe the timestamp. We don't care about the rest. We want to strip the rest out and we want to turn it into a string. So let's take a look at how this works. There's a built-in method for arrays. So there's built-in methods for strings like the to lowercase or the math.floor or math.ceil for numbers. But there is a built-in method for arrays called .map. And what .map will do is it will go through every individual record. It will go through every individual record. I think this is how we do it. Record. Every individual record. And it will change the value of it and it will return a new value. So at the end of this, string records will be... It's not string records. String records will be an array. The same way records is an array. It will be the same length as records, the one that we're taking in. But whatever we do in here, it will alter the value and return it. So let me show you what that means. If I was just to return record.message UUID, which is that long string there. We're not going to do anything with it, but just for sake of example. And then we console.log string records. Let's restart this server. Let's send a message. Oh, no, sorry, I need to send the word recap, don't I? There we are. The result is a new array, but we're only returning the message.uuid. So every item is just what we have returned from the map. So what we want to do is we want to return, well, we're going to want to return the record dot, let's remind ourselves, the record dot message dot content dot text. Whoa, that was a mouthful. So let's restart our server. Let's do this really slowly and let's kind of check at every step. Okay, wonderful. That's every message from this user. Obviously in our database it's only from one user, but for sake of example, this would only be returning mine, even if there were other people's in the database. Let's do something else with it. Let's grab the name of the text, then let's add in brackets sent at, then let's go record.timestamp, record.timestamp, and then boom, like that. So we added some hard-coded with some dynamic values. Let's restart the server. Let's try this again. Recap. Wonderful. So we see the message. We also see when it was sent. I notice a missing space there, so we'll pop that there. You can do some fiddly things, make the dates look more human friendly. I'll leave that to you. But we can grab data, we can do stuff with it, and all that matters is this is a full function. You can do stuff in it. You can create variables, you can fiddle with formatting, as long as the value you return is the value that you want returned. So in this case, it's the text, and then sent at, and then the timestamp. So there's string records. However, when we send a message, we don't want to send an array, we want to send a single string. So what we're going to want to do is take each of these values in the array, combine them into a string. There are a number of ways we could do this. We could do a for loop for every item in this array, and we could be adding strings to an array till it's just one long array with all the values. But there is an array method that will do this for us. So what we're going to do is I'm just going to go straight ahead and kind of rush to the send message, because I'll show you the method in line. So if we go request.body.to, request.body.from, I'm just going to save myself writing that. Now the third value is the message, which has to be a string. So we can go string records. You know what, for ease of reading, I am actually going to do this as a separate variable. So we have string records. Let's go single records as single string. And we're going to take string records, which is an array of strings. We're going to join them. We're going to take a look at how that looks. But that will be a string. And we're going to send it as records, a single string. Wonderful. Let's restart the server and try again. Recap. Oh, this is great. This is fab. So we got all of our messages back. There is one thing that I wish we could do, like I wish we could add a line here, which we can, we'll cover it in a moment. But other than that, I think we're pretty close to being done now. When you join, you notice I put an empty string in here. We could put anything in here. If I put a full stop, has to be a string though. But if I do this and hit recap, they're now all joined and there's a space. And there's a full stop separating them. In most languages, certainly JavaScript, we can use a backslash and an N to create a new line. Every one is a line break. So if I were to do one, it would just start on the next line. If I'm to do two, it will leave an empty line in the middle. Let's restart it, see what that does. So this is not going to be sent to the user. So the full stop was sent. The backslash N won't be sent. It means line break. So if I recap now, There we are. We've got all of our messages and when we sent them from the very beginning. So this kind of brings us to the end of our workshop. I'll be around for a few more minutes to answer questions, but let's talk a little bit about what we've done from the beginning and the next steps. So at the beginning, we spoke about JavaScript as a language. We spoke about a ton of features it has. We spoke about the different types it had. We talked about strings and numbers, arrays and objects. We also spoke about for loops, functions, including functions that don't take parameters, take one, take two, or take as many parameters as we need. We also ended up, because I forgot at the beginning, talking about if statements. We also spoke about, what was the other thing I forgot during the beginning? Can't quite remember. It's not a big deal. We set up an application from scratch. We built an Express web application server. We included our database. We included and initialized the Vonage API client, which is still called Nexmo. We built a function where we could send a message. It's a lovely reusable function. And this code is actually code I use when I build little applications. So I build it out as a function that looks pretty much identical to this. Then we built our inbound event handler. Firstly, we're checking if people sent us recap, case insensitive. And if they did, we're going to go find all the records. And assuming there's not an error, we will create a lovely single string from the items in the database belonging to that user and send them a message. And if they sent us anything other than recap, we'll just store it in the database. And assuming there's not an error, we'll send them a nice message in response. And then remember, we must respond with something. It doesn't have to be this. We could respond with some data as well. But you have to at least respond with a 200. Otherwise, the Vonage API will continuously try and hit /inbound. And the implications of that is we might end up with n, like as many items that all say the same thing, even though a user only sent it once. Because it will get through to the bottom and then it will try again. We also took a little bit of a look at the status endpoint, and that shows you different states of message being delivered, sent, read, and so on. Yeah, I think that's most things. So what are the next steps from here? Well, firstly, I really want to encourage you to take a look at our API documentation at developer.nexmo.com. We used down here the Messages API. The lovely thing about the Messages API is, if I go back to the code, you'll notice here that we had a type of messenger. We could take all of this code base and with very little adjustment, but mostly just changing the type, we could go ahead and send a message via SMS, via Viber, via WhatsApp. We don't have to keep rewriting our code in order to make it work in different contexts, which is really cool. But there is very robust documentation. So here's some API documentation that tells you how to use our APIs. Also on GitHub is the Node client. You could take a look there. On our blog, we have a ton of tutorials on how to use our different APIs, SDKs, client libraries, and so on. There are also some tutorials right here in the documentation. So sending a Facebook message will kind of recap you on the things we covered today, bar the storing it in a database. So it's all kind of covered there quite nicely, step by step. There are some other next steps though. You could do things like taking data, sending it off to a third-party service, like a translation service. Or perhaps you want to go grab data from somewhere else on the web, like, I send you the name of a city and you go and grab the weather data for that city and send it back to me. All of that can happen and the user doesn't need to care. They just care what they get sent back. You could also do things like using tools like Dialogflow to kind of build some, I don't know how to frame it, like conversational intelligence, like figuring out, if I send you book a flight from Los Angeles to Hawaii for less than $300, well, part of what this tool will do is pull out data points and then return it to you in a standard object, so you always know where to look for certain values. You could use something like this for like Q&A, gathering questions from users and doing so on multiple platforms. And as I said, you can also extend it to other platforms. So honestly, well done. That was, I thought I was going hugely over, but we still came in under 2 hours. So I'll stick around for another couple of minutes in the chat. Oh no, my captions went funny. That wasn't intentional. You can Sorry about that, folks. I will get that fixed. Just spotted that. So yes, anyone in the chat, if you have issues, let me know. Next time, I think we're going to do something with our video API. I think it's quite useful. So we'll build like a video conferencing tool from scratch again. We'll start with the same primer as a recap for those of you who are just learning, but also for people who are just joining us, we'll cover it again. And so yeah, I'll stick around for a couple of minutes. I'll leave the live stream on for a couple of minutes as well. Do you perhaps have any questions for me? You can pop them in the chat. And if there are none in a minute or so, I'll end the stream. I'm also going to go and watch Race Across the World after this, because I think it sounds like a really good TV show. Okay, well, the chat seems a little quiet, so I assume you're all doing okay. If you need any more help, feel free to reach out to me directly. I'm happy to help. But also, if you head to our developer.nextmo.com, where is it? On the homepage, I believe. Yeah, there's this button down here to a Slack. You can join our community Slack here. And a bunch of my team hang out in there and help people out and answer their questions. Final thing, while I still got a few of you, on the 14th of May we're running this Vonage Developer Day. It's a day full of content, a bunch of workshops. I'll be redoing this workshop as well, but quicker because I have 45 minutes. And a bunch of my lovely colleagues are also going to be doing talks, workshops, Q&As and interactive content. It's completely free, should be really good. There's also an opportunity to interact with other attendees. So if you're feeling a little cooped up and like you want to interact with other people, this is a fantastic way to do it. So that's at developer.nextmo.com/day, or if you go to developer.nextmo.com, on any page, it's a box up at the top and you can just click it to head to Developer Day. So I'm not going to hold you for any longer. Thank you for joining me for my first stream. It means a lot that you trusted me enough to come and stick it out to the end. Well done. And I think that leaves me about done. So I'm going to end the stream. See you in a couple of weeks.